Welcome to the Balancing Ambitions podcast. I'm your host, Kim Menapace. You are not alone in your pursuit to balance family life, work, side hustles, and taking care of yourself. Balance is not easy to achieve by any means, but we can all work to get better at it together by sharing our stories, tips, and wisdom. Let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome to this week's show of The Balancing Ambitions. We have Dave Menapace back today to do a proper introduction. For those of you who remember, Dave came and joined us for a discussion about fur babies and dogs and raising kids with dogs that we had for years before that, and just all the life stages of those. So we're excited to have Dave back to actually talk about what he does for work, how he did a big career pivot a few years ago, and what he's learned through his entrepreneurial journey and his various business lines that he does for a living. So, Dave, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Dave. I'm Kim's assistant, also known as her husband. But no, yeah, so I guess I'll just start at the beginning, just a really, really high level. I'm an entrepreneur now, but that wasn't always the case, right? So right after school, I went into really the healthcare industry, more like healthcare IT. And I stayed in that industry for about 12 or 13 years in various roles, jobs. I was really, really good at moving up the corporate chain. And as Kim and I got more interested in real estate and started buying real estate, and as that interest started to blossom into more tangible goals and things that I really want to do, I really started feeling unfulfilled in my job in corporate. And I think that happened for a lot of people probably during COVID when you start having more time to explore interests and hobbies and spending time with family. And it didn't happen for everyone, but it happened for me. And so I think it was right after we bought our second vacation home, this one in Maine, that uh, I decided to leave the corporate world. And of course, it was with some planning. Kim and I, for our listeners, for the listeners here, Kim and I, the idea started getting bounced around about 6 months before that. And I didn't have a great plan, so to speak, but I knew that I really wanted to do something within real estate. And at the time, it felt fairly low risk leaving my job only because I had built up a broad enough network in healthcare and in the corporate world that I felt really confident that I could go back and get a new job. I kind of more than anything just wanted like a 3 or 4 month break to just focus on the family, spend time with each other, and go enjoy the summer. That sort of, I think it was that second year of COVID. It was like 2021, maybe 2022, somewhere right in there.
2022. Yeah, I think it was after Chris was
Okay.
born. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of life has happened since then. So, there's sort of these different phases of, I guess, the entrepreneurial journey, and this may reside with some folks, especially if you don't have something established, like a side hustle that you want to make into your real hustle or something like that. And so, for me, there's this big phase of like exploration. What do I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? How can I continue to make income? All those sorts of questions were things that I really had to sort of sit and think about. And it was really interesting. What I ended up doing, just to cut right to the chase, was I ended up selling real estate because I did have my real estate license. I learned the nuances of that industry and how to gain clients quickly and how to, be of good service to my clients. I did more exploration though, right? So from there, I went to conferences, real estate related conferences, and I learned about the idea of property management, which was interesting that hadn't crossed my mind before. And then there were a few other ideas that we kicked around as well. But the two that I really leaned into back in 2022, beyond our own investments, were being a real estate agent and growing a property management company. The thing that I didn't focus a ton on, and we'll kind of hit on this towards the end of more like lessons learned, is I really didn't create my life by design. I just kind of did everything, and I found myself busier than I ever was, making less money than I had in like 10 or 12 years with no guaranteed income. And that was really taxing, not only for me, it was taxing for you, Kim, and it was taxing for the kids, even though they didn't really realize it yet. So as 2022 came to a close, going into 2023, I realized that a lot of my focus was going to be I actually I paused and I really thought about what was important to me. How like it was finally then about a year later that I started thinking about how do I want to spend my time? Who do I want to spend my time with? What kind of work is interesting to me? And those were important things that like I wish I spent a month thinking about in the very beginning of my journey. And it's okay that I didn't. Better late than never. But the things that were really important to me were um, time with family, health, being able to work out, exercise, do things that I kind of put on pause for almost an entire year that were really important to me before. And I'd say experiences, right? Like Cape Cod is my favorite experience, like going there, spending time down there. And what we realized was being a real estate agent wasn't super conducive to allow me to do all these things, especially in the beginning. Not that I was going to totally cut that out of my life, but I really had to recenter and refocus. And it was then really at the beginning of 2023 that we made some investments in education and really doubled down on the property management business, which is the five-star co-host. And we did that because within this, education that we invested into, we learned how to build a team, systems, and a business. And it was the most scalable and it was quite enjoyable. So 2023 was all about building the vacation rental management business, so to speak, the five-star co-host. Continuing on, and we can answer any questions you have after this. We eventually launched a short-term rental consulting company that's called Launchpad Consulting. We did that because we realized not every person, not every prospect is a good fit for us in the management world, and a lot of people are really interested in self-managing their home, their vacation home. They just don't know where to start or what to do or what technology to sign up for, and that's where Launchpad really came in and created a nice product. And because we had a team already, the team that we had in place could help service these clients. So it was sort of like we had two different lines of service, ways to serve people. And, but the same team was competent in both. It was towards the end of 2023 that you and I both really started making some new investments into more like personal development. And that really, I feel like that was like the real like Phoenix coming out of the ashes. Like that was the real growth that happened. What, at least I learned from that was the more that I focused on personal development, leadership, being a parent, being a husband, being somebody that I wanted to be, the business development always seemed to take care of itself. It was sort of like a natural byproduct of personal development, business development, professional development, byproducts of personal development. So as we got into 2024, then we have the five-star co-host, we have Launchpad Consulting. We have still some real estate sales, but really selective, mainly like friends and family. And it's interesting because I'm really, really good at it. It's just not how I always want to spend my time, right? So, but I do want to spend that time for very specific clientele. So there's really those three, lines of service. And what sort of developed over the last year, we're recording this beginning Q1 of 2025, all of those existing businesses, with exception to real estate sales, that's just me, but the management business has grown considerably, servicing properties from Cape Cod up through Maine. We're about to start taking on hotels. We have a team, and it's really structured in a way where honestly, I could take 30 days off, and while maybe some things slow down, the company would still run really, really well. Also, people on our team can take time off, and it's not like they have to walk back into a laundry list of activities when they get back. And Launchpad Consulting and the Five Star Co-host are both structured that way, and that was really important. The other things I do, these are still streams of income, but I consider them to be um, they really fill up my cup. They make me feel like I'm contributing back into different industries and different people, and I love it. So it's coaching. So I now coach in that mastermind, that educational program that Kim and I purchased into years ago. That's called Short Term Rental Secret. So I spend a few hours a day coaching in there and educating what's been dozens, if not hundreds, of property managers on how to how to build a business there. And then on the personal development side, I've selectively taken on certain students that I've really helped out on that front. We call it mindset, you call it personal development, anything like that. But what's cool about all of this, kind of rounding it out, is now I do feel like my calendar reflects my priorities, and like it is much more intentional way of living. And it's interesting because one could look at the different businesses that we have and say, wow, that must be really, really, really busy. It does have that appearance because it may take weeks for somebody to get on my schedule, but I would argue and say that like it is not busy anymore. It truly is by design. I get my health in, we get our family time in, I get my personal time in. And I don't know if the last few years were necessary of like grinding it out and building it to get there. So I had the team, but I'm happy with where we're at now. So I'll just pause.
You
I'll pause
covered a
there.
lot of ground there. So I'm going to go back through some parts and go into a bit more detail because I think there's some important points in there. So before the pivot into real estate in 2022 and all the different branches of business there, let's go back quickly to your career in healthcare and data and IT as well at a hospital. And talk about you went to grad school. You were on a career path where you said, I want to be a CEO, CIO of a hospital. And
Yeah.
I remember you'd even be on call for troubleshooting IT issues when we lived in California. So I forget the rotation, if it was every 8 weeks or 6 weeks, but you'd be on call for a week and having to field questions from doctors and nurses in the middle of the night. And so I think it's really cool as I think about our personal development and mentorship and coaching that we've had about your environment, the people you spend the most time with, and how that is influences your life goals and your vision for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think both of us have done grad school and both of us say we wouldn't do it again now, knowing where we are in 2025 versus where we were when we started those journeys and where our careers were. So I think that's an important point for people to think about
Yeah.
is that you just don't know how life is going to unfold and what's going to draw your interest. And but it's really, really critical the rooms you put yourself in because it has a huge impact on what you think is possible, on your creativity and your imagination, and what questions people prompt you on and what they challenge you on. And something I remember
Great
much, I
point.
think it was before I was even in the workforce, maybe in college or high school, I remember hearing a stat that the average person does at least one big career change in their lifetime, sometimes two. And so it's not uncommon for people to have a big pivot like yours. I haven't had one yet, but I just knowing those statistics, I think that that's not unreasonable to think about. Even yesterday or 2 days ago, I was at a conference with a women's panel about cultivating your executive voice and your presence. And amplifying your voice and cultivating your executive presence. And one of the women said she was a Spanish teacher and then she ended up in investor relations at a company. So it just, you don't know. And she explained how she got from step A to, Z, but it was very cool. She didn't anticipate that she, didn't know where she would end up 20 years later when from starting as a Spanish teacher. And I think that's really cool to be open-minded to that and allow those pivots and those opportunities, which can start as a conversation, a coffee date, a conference, and continuing to follow that thread of interest for you.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and I won't go too deep on this, but our something that I learned recently at a conference is that our habits are um, a response to the habitat that we're in. And, you know, when you're in that flow, right, of like early 20s, or, you know, if you went to school, college in Massachusetts, it's not uncommon to look in Boston for your first job. Not always, but like it's a common thing, right? Or live in Boston because a lot of other people are doing it. All great experiences. It's just this is how we tend to make decisions as humans, right? And um, the path for me to get a job at a hospital was a common decision that a lot of people at the company I was at tended to make. Then once you're in the hospital, right, it's not uncommon to want to move up the ladder. Hence the decision to go to grad school and want to become a CIO because I really admired the chief information officer that we had, and he was quite a mentor for me for like 2 years. And it's really interesting who we naturally decide to make our mentors and the decisions that we make. And the thing I'll say too is like they're not all bad, right? Like I have zero regrets in any of the decisions that I made professionally up until I mean, really throughout the whole trajectory of it. Of course, the only thing where I'm like, I felt like the expenditure of time, energy, and money on my graduate degree, now I can see that, you know, it didn't help me fulfill any goals, but it was still cool, cool, you know, life experience anyways, for what it's worth. But yeah, it's interesting. Everything was pointing in a much different direction. And talk about habitat. You know, Kim, it was your idea, right, for us to buy a home on Cape Cod. And what a great idea it was. And it was that idea, right, my environment that of, you know, environment being Kim, allowed us to gain experience in that area and, you know, explore new ideas as it related to real estate and vacation rentals.
Well, and the only reason I had the idea to buy that vacation home is because I had that in my environment, which was one of my best friends from growing up. Her parents bought a small beach cottage 35 years earlier when she was very young. And I wanted to do that. And it just seemed like a very simple, not saying easy by any means. I know people need capital to buy an Airbnb or short-term rental, to purchase it and furnish it and all that. But that was something in my paradigm, was that awareness that you can make a stretch in your 30s and thank yourself in your 60s that you did get that and you got to enjoy the property for all those years and you got to allow renters to help pay the bulk of the expenses. So that was very cool. But I do applaud you for never thinking an idea is crazy. It doesn't matter what idea I bring to you, and even vice versa. I try to embrace those ideas, but I think it's very cool because sometimes we hear from couples approaching us saying, I am really interested in starting an Airbnb property management business or getting an Airbnb. My spouse or partner is not on board, or maybe it's the wife leading the way and the husband's a little more nervous or gun shy. And I think that balance can be very healthy as long as there's good communication channels and listening and thoughtfulness. But it is challenging. I think we were on the same page, and sometimes we've stretched each other in different comfortability of things, but always having that open communication and relying on additional resources to ensure we're making a good decision on something. I think that's also been very helpful. And I wouldn't say we've done every decision perfectly. We did the best we could with the knowledge we had at that time, and we just continue to one of our which our values in our company is to fail forward.
Right.
Don't beat yourself up over a misstep or a mistake. It's all learning. And if you stay in that negative energy of resentment towards yourself, then it's just expended energy that's wasted. So continue to use that lesson to move forward and continue to improve and augment yourself there.
Yeah. And one thing that you said earlier that if I could double down on too is just like your environment and how that helps you make decisions. You know, the back at the end of 2022, early 2023, you know, we took a leap of faith and paid a significant amount of money to go into a mastermind, which is both a community and an educational program. So we could have a place to ask questions that you can't get answered in college or grad school, right? And that relates specifically to our management business. And meeting with people several times a week that are already in the industry and have had some battle scars and have experience and have had successes really, really helped expedite the trajectory of that business specifically. And of course, we've paid into other groups now as well whenever we want to learn something, you know, be it mindset or something else. And it's really fascinating because something I kind of glanced over because the 20-15 minute or so timeline that I gave, that can tend to go for like 3 or 4 hours if you let it. But there was a period of time where I was buying and renovating homes out of state, and there was so much learning that happened. So much learning that came from that experience. My biggest lesson from it, though, was to not go into new business endeavors without getting education and joining a community of people already doing it. No matter what the cost is of that education or that community, it'll pale in comparison to the cost of the missteps that you make. So just like being able to tap into other people's experience makes it so you don't have to learn hard lessons the hard way. And that was a really interesting awareness that I had maybe like 6 months ago. And it's one that like now I slow it down a little bit whenever there's a business idea, and I tap into the different networks that we've paid to be in, to really help us see around corners and evaluate the best way to approach a problem and if it needs, you know, if it should be its own business or whatever it might be. And so it's just a massive, massive awareness over the last few years.
I think you're right. These places are amazing to be able to ask questions, but they also turn around and ask us hard questions. Why are you doing that? What is your goal? What is your ideal week? Why are you not delegating this? And I think that's also, if not equally, but more valuable than us having a forum to ask questions about certain topics that we want to see around the corner, like you said. So, all
Yeah.
right. There's something else I'd love to revisit too. I think that this was interlaced in your story there, but I'd love to really double down on the impact that your job, when you weren't happy in a W-2 job anymore, that particular one, and how even our son could sense it, for the year or so before when you were studying for your real estate test. And it just, I think that it was definitely an interesting time to leave a steady job to go do real estate sales where it can be a lot more volatile, and the first year can be especially tough establishing yourself, being primarily a buyer agent because you haven't built up those rapport yet for seller agents as much. You have to be a seller agent as much. And yeah, how our son could sense your energy from when you were working in that job. And I think throughout the last 3 years, as you've ended up very busy at times, but then asking yourself, am I being productive? And is my schedule reflecting my values, and course correcting several times along the way to get to your place? I think that your place now is pretty close to ideal, I'd say. And I think that it took a lot of trial, error, reflection, and hard questions and conversations from mentors and our in between us in order to get to that place. We tout entrepreneurship as owning your schedule, work for yourself, live your ideal life. And sometimes we'd wake up and say we aren't doing that. That's supposed to be what the position we're in, but we're not. And why are we not there? And how can we fix that? So, is there anything you want to share more about that?
Yeah. Well, I think like to below all of this, it's important to like really understand yourself and your tendencies, right? So for me, I had um this like fear of criticism, like this people pleasing tendency. And then when I did a personality test, I learned that I was naturally inclined to be a connector, talking with people. I'm extroverted. I'm out and about and doing things and talking with people all day and helping people solve problems through connections. And all of those things, they don't take money, but they take time, right? And what there can be this fear, it's not for everybody, but sometimes I fell in the camp of having this fear. When you are not making money, you want to do everything in your power to produce an income, to create a service, to get a client, to be able to provide, right? And I think especially um, guys may have a tendency to fall into this more than women, and I don't know, but like this was definitely my case where I kept having this like paradigm in the beginning of, you want something to get done, give it to a busy person. And I'm a busy person, so just stack it on. Like I'll take care of it. I'll just stay up later. I'll just do it. And so, especially when I was working the W-2 job and I had this mentality, it was really unhealthy, but I didn't know that until years later, right? And so it would just be me. It was almost like having kids was an inconvenience to me getting something done and being productive in my own mind. It's super unhealthy. And that all kind of came to a head a couple years later, but like I started to finally understand that a bit down the road, when we realized like we only have one shot at being parents and being married and having a life. And um it's taken a lot of education, mentorship, trial and error. Like that has been owning my schedule has been much harder than owning a business. Owning, like being a leader of my own time has been much harder for me than being a leader of a team. We don't, I don't know if you want to get too deep into it, but like a key to continuing to build your business and everything is like upscaling, growing as a leader, right? And that was always easier for me than becoming the leader of my own schedule. And it was really, really interesting. Um, yeah, of course, like Logan could definitely feel it. He was not enthusiastic about approaching me for anything, when especially when he was like 2, 3 years old. Huge awareness and like huge, I won't call it a fail because I learned from it, but like a huge whiff as a parent, a huge opportunity for a redo or to area for improvement. And honestly, I feel like it was only more recently when like I do these things called the 2 week time study and I look at what it is that's coming into my schedule, what I'm working on. And for the first time, I started tracking the lead time for all the meetings that were happening in a week. And I started saying, like, okay, unless it's a really, really high end sales, like a client for selling into one of our businesses, I really, or it's with you, I don't want anything to have less than a 1 week lead time because then that means that it was appropriately scheduled and prioritized and fit nicely and fit around the things that I want in my day. And so there's incredible balance in my schedule now. I've had to put the fear of criticism to rest. And yeah, it might frustrate people if it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks to get a half-hour meeting with me. But I've been able to not only show up, I feel like for our family, I've been able to show up much better for those clients as well because there's space and energy and more focus and more, there's more intention put into those meetings. Big learning for any entrepreneur. This is what they don't teach you in, in anything, really.
It's so true. And I just reread a book by Brene Brown, and she said we use productivity as a measuring stick of our value, and uh, being busy and exhausted as a badge of honor in our society. And she just trying to change that and make space for rest and vulnerability and all of that. And I think rereading that from a few years later and all the work we've done on designing our lives and actually building towards that ideal so that we feel present, rested, we're taking care of our health, we're happy and alive around our kids and in all parts of our life. It just is cool seeing that come full circle and seeing how being intentional about designing it that way is there.
The motto I've kind of taken on, and I created this for a different intention, but like I've started to take it on, and it's having space to think is being productive. Having time to be happy is taking action. Having time to go work out and cook a healthy meal is productive. And when I started really thinking about that, I had no problem keeping my 3 hour personal block on Tuesday, and different things like that. And it's really helped me settle into a really, really fun flow lately.
I love that. And something else that makes me think of is back in October, we had one of our presenters at one of the retreats we went to say, if your sleep, nutrition, movement, or hydration are anything less than on a scale of 1 to 10, a 7 or less, then you're always going to cap your business at a 7 or less on how successful it can be. And even this week, I noticed one night I had not so great sleep because I had too much caffeine late in the day and a couple other things. And I felt it so much on that work day. And
Hmm.
then it took 3 days of good sleep to help me recover from it. And rest and honoring your body and your schedule and making it conducive to be well rested, taken care of, happy, healthy, productive is not, like you said, wasted energy, and shifting those priorities around from what's normal and the standards of average person versus what's a little bit more in our protected bubble and circles that we've spent a lot of time curating and crafting and leaning into and fostering relationships in has been very interesting. And I think that I now understand even more so why she said that and how it affects me. And even this past weekend, I had a medical procedure on Friday and I still felt really tired going into the weekend. And I had a nap both days, which is unheard of. If you asked me several years ago if I took naps, I never did. And then even with young kids, I probably needed a lot more of them and I didn't do them. And so even teaching our kids that it's okay to rest and rest is not a bad thing or laziness or any of that, that starts now at this age and showing them and modeling that. But they also saw me going to yoga class and going to the gym, and they don't have that sadness and averse reaction and clinging to the leg, crying, screaming, don't go anymore. They're more like, oh, mommy, how was the gym? When you get back. So it's really cool to see those small but important shifts in their mindset too around this stuff and really practicing those values that we're preaching to them.
Totally. Totally.
Something else I wanted to touch on before we wrap up is you had mentioned that was a phoenix rising out of the ashes moment. So I'd love to talk about this a bit more. So, David, we've had some tough years, and I think that I don't want to say the whole year was tough, but there was tough moments where we just felt like, oh, when New Year's came around for that year, we said, oh, this is a great reset button. We're excited for next year, and this year is going to be the year where a phoenix rises from these ashes. And I laugh because we said that about 3 years ago. And I think that finally in 2024 is when it felt like it actually happened, even though we thought it would happen a year or two earlier. And I remember Jay Papasan, one of our guest speakers at a different one of the retreats we've been at in the last couple of years, said they've typically find in a 10-year span with any business or endeavor, you have 2 really great years, 2 really tough years, and then a lot of average years. And I thought that was really helpful to think about, and thinking about how years too, just personally, I think we have a very positive attitude and look for the silver lining in everything. And even if it was a tough moment or, day, week, month, year, that we still look at it with all the bright spots and the positive things that came out of that year. But when we look at and chalk it up to a particular time period, admit that it was a hard and challenging time for whatever reason or a number of reasons. And so I think that that's also good for people to realize too, is that what the optics of things and what you see on social media or other content that is shared may not be what it truly is on the inside. And it's okay to have those moments and reflect and be honest with yourself and get help in whatever way, shape, or form, whether it's hiring more help at home so you're less exhausted or have more time for certain things, or hiring education, or going on a retreat and a trip to start getting in different rooms with people, and releasing that guilt around that or expectations or judgment from other people on traveling with young kids and you're gone a lot, or you're gone, more than I am gone from my kids. How dare you? That's a them problem, not a you problem. And I think that that's something that's just nice to really honor and be transparent about with other people, because I think that there's definitely been roller coaster moments in the last 3-4 years, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, and as long as you have the right mindset, there's always growth that comes out of those moments as well. But the other thing that I've had to learn is that the growth that comes out of it, the growth is more of like a result, but like that moment, um, having to like sit in it and evaluate it and understand where things are going right, where things are going wrong. And rarely is that moment itself fun. It's just we are a different person out of it, and that different person we can look back and say there was growth there, but yeah, it's really interesting, and one thing that I'll say I love about entrepreneurship is that there's no ceiling to the services you can provide, the income you can make as a result of it, if that's one of your goals, the time freedom that you can have. But your your view, your paradigm around fear and consistency, it's just really interesting because you can create a much more consistent life for yourself. And like I guess the biggest thing that I've learned is that whatever is happening in our outside world with our clients, with our team, with our lead generation, whatever it is, the consistency will or lack thereof, it's always a reflection of like what's ever happening between the ears. And the thing that I didn't know in the beginning, which now I'm really focused on, is the more you can focus on just like your own personal development, leadership, even if you're a solopreneur, leadership in yourself, and creating like a calm and consistent, sort of like serene space that you can operate from, like a good baseline that you can operate from and feel comfortable in, the more natural and the more consistent your results are going to be. And it was really interesting when I realized I had full control over my results, and it all came just like from my state of mind. And it was a lot of learning had to happen over the last few years just to get to this point, and there's still a lot of learning to go.
And I think that you're absolutely right. That is true in entrepreneurship and everything. I also think it's true in parenting.
Oh yeah.
How we show up and bring ourselves, how much we've taken care of ourselves and our needs, and that affecting our energy really can have a huge impact on those interactions, with transitions and boundaries and all of that with our kids too. So we'll go into that a little bit more in the next episode. All right. Thank
Love
you
it.
so much for coming, Dave. And we finally got to do this proper introduction that was probably long overdue. So, to all our listeners, have a beautiful day. And please stay tuned for next week when Dave is back to talk about our parenting journey more recently. As always, if you enjoyed this show, please leave a review, because when you leave a review or share an episode, you make it easier for someone else to find us and benefit from these stories and tips we share. There is a link to everything we talked about in the show notes. Thank you all for listening to the Balancing Ambitions podcast, and have a beautiful day.